What's going on here now? There we go. All right. Okay. Yeah, we're live. Okay. How's everyone doing today? Of course, it's been a little while since I've done a live stream, but I'm really excited about doing this one because I'm going to be talking to Jacques Boudreau. He's the current leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada. I don't believe I've yet to have a good sit-down conversation with him, and I'm really interested to hear what he's got to say. We're going to be discussing basically everything as it pertains to the philosophy of liberty, libertarianism, and even the political side of things, and populism, and how that's all getting tied together, and whether it's a smart move for libertarians to kind of get in bed with populists in some regard. Now, one thing that off the top of my head, I remember a lot of people from Hollywood saying many years ago is there's no such thing as bad publicity, but that's just my thoughts on it. But I'm just going to hand it over to Jacques and give him a second or a minute or two to introduce himself to you folks. So go ahead there, Jacques.
Thank you.
No problem.
Well, my name is Jacques Boudreau. As stated, I am the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, have been for almost 3 years now. I am now retired, but prior to that, I was an actuary in the life insurance industry for about 38 years. For those who know me a little bit will know that probably as a result of my training, I care a great deal about the most important fiscal problem this country faces that nobody talks about, which are the unfunded liabilities. So I bring that to the fore as a politician because it needs to be talked about, but it isn't. So in a nutshell, that's who I am.
Yeah, well, actually, in terms of the unfunded liabilities, and of course, that also would include the massive debts and deficits, obviously. And my problem, of course, with that, and I've talked about that extensively and many times, I'm sure people have heard it enough for me, but I'll just hand it back over to you. But it's the intergenerational theft that comes with this kind of, constant, at least historically, it used to be pay as you go, right? But as we see, I mean, anyone alive today that even understands basic economics or mathematics can realize that, you could tax people at 100% and you're not paying off the debts. The people that incurred the debts and who benefit tremendously from the debts and deficits and these unfunded liabilities, as you say, they're not the ones that are going to be paying it off. So that's basically what I've kind of phrasing that I've used before is that's intergenerational theft as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, a little bit more on that, Jacques, if you wouldn't mind, actually.
Well, first of all, I certainly don't disagree with the way you've described it. Let me put it this way so that because I have been advocating for about 15 years now, as strongly as I can, that young people ought to be able to opt out of the CPP because speaking of theft, I mean, young people are being abused. So let me just cite a few numbers. If you retired in 1969, the internal rate of return on your contribution to the CPP were about 45% per year. That's an enormous amount. And you ask the question, well, how can it be so large? Well, the reason that the again, implied internal rate of return is because the vast majority of the benefit that you were receiving were being paid by the contribution of people who came after you, right? So you had made very, very few contribution on your own, but got big benefit. Now, the same implied internal rate of return on your contribution for someone who's going to retire in 2037, I believe, is 2.1%. Well, again, why is it so low? Well, because a big chunk of your contribution have actually gone to pay somebody else's benefit. They didn't go into this so-called account to fund your retirement. They're gone. They've gone to pay for people who came before you. And so that's one element where we don't pre-fund. Well, the CPP now is called the steady state funding, which means it's about 20 to 30% funded, but it still leaves 70 to 80% that's unfunded. And then if you add to that, of course, and by the way, just to put things in context, the total unfunded liability, so that would be for CPP, OAS, Medicare, and some public sector defined benefit plan,
right,
all combined adds up to about $2.7 trillion. 2.7 trillion. The combined debt, federal and provincial today, is 2.1 trillion. So the unfunded liability are about 130% of the debt. So when people talk about debt, and Freeland, of course, basically lies to people, or at least misleads them, because she likes to obsess about the debt to GDP ratio, saying that it's quite manageable. But what she ignores, what she doesn't tell people, is that she's only counting the federal debt.
Right.
Now, Canada being a federation means that it has large subnational components, right? Ontario, Quebec, and so forth, right?
Yeah. And actually, before you continue on, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, this was a few years ago, so I'm sure it hasn't got any worse, but Ontario, I believe, had the largest sub-sovereign debt on the planet.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. Right? So you add Ontario's, you add Quebec's, BC's, Alberta. All of this takes federal and provincial combined like 2.1 trillion. Right. So if she was using that number, of course, the ratio to GDP, because of course the taxpayers, they're not segregated between, I'm a federal tax payer and I'm a provincial tax. I mean, we as taxpayers have to carry the load. So a truthful presentation would be to emphasize the combined federal and provincial debt, not just limit yourself to the federal. And of course, she doesn't say a word about the unfunded liability. I'm not even sure she knows what an unfunded liability is.
Right.
So we are in very, very bad fiscal state. And, I have the experience and the knowledge to be able to project these things. Of course, they are dependent on a lot of things, including immigration level. But my expectation is that if you think things are bad right now in terms of, say, healthcare, things are will continue to get worse until about 2040, 41. And then we will finally hit bottom and start improving slightly, because the demographics are against us, terribly against us.
Yes, very much an aging population. And like you're saying, the fact that they're trying to rely on mass immigration and that kind of thing, and these asylum seekers as a means to, kind of paint over past mistakes. Well, that's actually something that we should kind of talk about too, is the fact that is literally what they're doing today. This is just another version of another way to prop up. And I would suggest, and I'm just really curious about this. I use my own anecdotal experience, but I just can't understand, because, obviously there's a lot of baby boomers in this country. I'm not sure if you fit into that demographic or not, but I mean, they've done quite well. I mean, some of the people, even some of the poorest baby boomers I know, are doing really well in comparison to a lot of their successive generations. And what I could never understand is why is there not massive outrage for the fact do people, like, I can understand if you don't have kids, but where are the people, because there's a lot of Canadians obviously that still have kids, even if it's only one or two, but where is the large protests or outrage or show of support for their young people who are being placed in these precarious positions, and once again relying on this Ponzi scheme that there's going to be another level, aka mass immigration. But as we know, that can change and pivot on a dime. A lot of people that actually come to this country actually are already starting to leave and travel to other jurisdictions, because they're seeing that it's what they were sold, the grass wasn't quite as green as what they were told. So to rely on mass immigration as a means to prop up or sustain these unfunded liabilities and this kind of massive debts and deficits, for maybe for the short term for a little bit, but for the medium and long term, which is where it's going to really affect the young people, or at least those 40 and under. Once again, I just can't understand why there isn't a show of outrage, but I don't know, maybe you have a little bit more to say on that, Jacques.
Well, I think there isn't one, because I think most people don't understand. I mean, if they listen to my lectures, I think they would take to the street, or at least ought to. But I want to go back to something you said, because I think it's crucial. You use the term Ponzi scheme, and you're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
All of those that I mentioned, CPP, OAS, Medicare, they are all Ponzi schemes, because none of it has been pre-funded.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Like like a big chunk of my career as an actuary was to make sure that my employer had set aside enough money, that we call them actuarial liabilities, to make up for deficit in the future, to make sure that we would actually make good on the promises made. Okay. But people have got to realize that a Ponzi scheme in the private sector is a criminal act.
Mm,
If you run a Ponzi scheme, they will put you in jail.
right.
But strangely enough, although, no, I shouldn't say strangely because it's commonplace, there's a rule for thee and a rule for me when it comes to the government, because they have granted themselves the power to run Ponzi schemes, but legally, right?
Right.
So no politician is going to go to jail for running Ponzi schemes.
Mm,
Now, to elaborate a little bit, yes, young people ought to be really, really upset about what's happened before.
hmm
But as, at the same time, it, like as I said, the money is gone, right? As much as I want to point out to people that we have a problem, I cannot bring a magic solution, because when the money has already been paid to someone who contributed only for 3 years, say, of CPP, and suddenly took benefits for 20 years, and now they're dead. I mean, we can't go after these people. I mean, they're no longer around, and they benefited from, again, taking contribution of people who came after them. Now,
Yeah.
but this has to stop. Like, we have to stop this idea that we can kick the can down the road, that suddenly we have to ramp up immigration massively. If
hmm
from the beginning the government had applied the same rule that they do to the private sector and demanded that money be set aside, because actuarially you can calculate all these things to decide, yes, this is what we need to set aside.
hmm
It is feasible. But from a political point of view, I'll tell you what, I mean, we have a system that is so messed up, is that if you were to go to the population and say, I am running on a mandate where we're going to provide some services, but a big chunk of the taxes that we're going to collect are going to go into this fund, to make sure that we can pay people in the future.
hmm
It would be, and you're running against somebody who says, never mind that, we're going to give you a bunch of free stuff. Well,
mm
who do you think is going to win? It's the
Yeah.
free stuff advocate, right?
Yeah.
But again, if it comes at the expense of people, and I've made this point many times, when you start doing this and you're punting or kicking the can down the road, people who are not even born are not there to defend themselves by voting you out, right?
Yeah.
Like, if the young people knew this, they'd be, as you say, they'd be outraged and say, enough is enough, right?
Yeah.
I wish I had been born 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, because I would have voted you bums out. So
Right.
again, it goes to how messed up the system is that
Mhm.
allows essentially the abuse of people who are yet to come.
Right. Well, that's such a great point. And actually, the thing that they kind of actually segues perfectly into kind of where I was gonna lead this conversation next is, you're absolutely right. If the young, and the key phrase that you said there was, if the young people knew about this, and this is something that I've been observing for what I've been doing this on and off, I guess, for about 12 years now. And it's the lack of information that a lot of Canadians, and not just Canadians, this is happening obviously all over the world, but in particular as Canadians, this is where our concerns are going to be lying the most, is the young people today. They're not getting this kind of knowledge, obviously, from the education. That's blatantly obvious for anyone that's paying attention. None of the thought leaders, right? Those in the media, they're not helping them, right? Even in like post secondary, up in the universities, you're not getting that kind of proper knowledge, because I believe everything today is taught under the Keynesian model. And to a degree, I would suggest that even some of it's getting to the point where it's getting more closer or aligned to modern monetary theory, which leaves people confused, because if that's your only economic modeling that you're aware of, then it's easy to make the case or use the political propaganda that this is nothing to be concerned about. Whereas, if people were taught actual classical economics or Austrian economics, or were at least privy to the kind of knowledge that people like you and I are aware of, like you say, I believe there would be a lot of outrage, and especially the young people today would be definitely up in arms, because they would recognize that no, you're not going to get even some of these little temporary promises or little things that the liberals are now trying to throw some red meat to the young people. It's like, yeah, you might get something, but it's like someone stealing $100 out of your wallet and give you back $10. It's not really much of a deal, to be honest with you. And considering the unfunded liabilities, it's even worse than that. So my question, sorry for getting a little bit long in there, but so my question to you is, what do you think of the idea? And Dave Smith is one of the big proponents of it down in the United States, in terms of not necessarily, I mean, think about it. We libertarians were already getting the shit end of the stick. We already get, like people that talk a lot of smack because they don't understand things. They just listen to rhetoric. So what do you think of the idea in terms of at least whipping up some attention and getting some attention on things, at least in terms of reaching out to, so down in the US, when they had their convention recently, they brought Donald Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy, and RFK. Now, obviously, no one's going to suggest or pretend that either of those three are actually proper libertarians, philosophically, for sure. But what they can do is bring large audience of people, young and old, to listen to this kind of stuff. And we don't have to necessarily agree with the populace, but at the very least, we can use their big platforms and their ability to reach out to large segments of our population and get that audience to at least get that term libertarian and get the young people and anyone else who's interested in that start to learn about that. Because for me personally, I'm biased a little bit, but once you learn about libertarianism, I mean, it's very intriguing to me, and it doesn't matter what age you are. It's something that gives you, an understanding of what it means to be a free human being. You get to learn proper economics. I think it does a great job in terms of giving you good guidance if you're not religious and how you should treat people in society. So anyways, I know that was a little bit long, a little bit rambling, but anyways, what are your thoughts on that, Jacques?
Well, I would love to do sort of a Canadian equivalent. Like, I don't know, are you aware of Gad Saad?
Yes, I am. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, I am.
So Gad,
I got his book here somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, he's a great guy, right? Great guy.
Yes, he is.
And he's been railing about the taxes he pays.
Mm.
Now, I don't know if that necessarily makes him a libertarian, but I mean, I would love to have him at a speaker at a convention of ours.
Right. Yes.
So that you could, because it would give us, again, because your point is spot on. He may not be a true libertarian, but I think anybody like him who thinks that he's being fleeced, and he is, right, would provide a bit of credibility. I mean, I would love, again, I don't know if Jordan Peterson is a libertarian, but I think that many of his viewpoints are certainly well aligned. I'd love to have him as a speaker. The problem is, I don't think these guys would do it for free, and our coffers are not all that well filled, right? So
right.
But yes, in theory, I would love to try to do something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad you brought up Jordan Peterson as well, because I'm just trying to think while you were bringing him up, which conversation it was. I believe it was with the two gentlemen from Konstantin Kiesman. I'm the other guy's name's escaping me right now, but he had them on. They had a conversation, and I was actually pleasantly surprised. Not just there, but the term libertarian was brought up multiple times. Now, he's kind of on the fence, Jordan Peterson. I think he's been surrounded by at least a couple libertarians, but I don't think he's been surrounded by enough of them to get a full-throated, perspective in what the philosophy entails. But then there was another area. Which one was? Oh, are you aware of Bruce Party?
Oh yes, great guy.
So he actually it was him being in a conversation with Jordan Peterson as well, and the term once again libertarian was brought up, and of course it perked my ears. And both of those gentlemen are very much fence sitters because of the negative kind of connotation that because of the collectivists, the kind of rhetoric they use to describe libertarians. But I firmly believe that as they get closer to or at least speaking with other libertarians and people like yourself or even myself, I think would be excellent, because we're the people you're talking about right now. We're all talking about Canadians, right? Jordan Peterson is a Canadian. Gad Saad is a Canadian. And these are two gentlemen in particular that have very prominent voices. They're well known, tens of millions of people, probably hundreds of millions of people all over the world that now are aware of who these gentlemen are and the kind of thing that they could do in terms of bringing the attention and the eyes. And once again, if they were to sit down and discuss, the philosophy of liberty or libertarianism with gentlemen like yourself that's fully versed and knowledgeable on the subject, then they could have a lot of those misnomers clarified. And I think more and more people would be more accepting of not just supporting libertarians or voting for libertarians, but helping out with some of that fundraising. Because just like you're saying, really, at the end of the day, listen, folks, we live in capitalist society. Well, it's like a third way, but you need money in this modern world we live in, right? Money, is what you need to spread if you want to get your knowledge and your information around, and that's what you want to do, then you need money. And that, as far as that goes, Jacques, this is somewhere where I've been early on, that's the thing. We all go through our phases, right? I went through a minarchist stage, then I went through like more of a purist stage, and now I'm more like a realist stage, right? Which I think is actually the best position I've been at now, because the idealism and the purist sounds good in theory, but you're just going to be constantly circle jerking with a bunch of other purists, and it's not really going to help in the real world. And I'm all about, let's get things happening in the real world. So if you ever want to, like, I want to maybe do some more of these things, and maybe I or you could try to figure out ways to have conversations or to set up events, do something where there can be some fundraising, because I would love, me personally, I would love to see, and that's one of the areas where I don't do a whole lot of, external speaking engagements. But if it's something like that, I'd be more than willing to step outside of my little comfort zone here in my own little studio and go out there and be out and around amongst other like-minded people, or people that are at least curious about this. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we should follow up. I mean, what I'm hearing from you is very gratifying. So again, people who know me know that I don't sugarcoat things. I don't try to pretend things are different than they really are. I mean, one of my, no, I would say that my biggest disappointment is the way we got treated during COVID. I thought for sure was going to elicit among millions of Canadian, or I would say trigger the buried, I didn't know I was a libertarian element, and make it come out to the forefront.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I'm looking at the Freedom Convoy, and I'm thinking, well, good for you guys, but where's the rest of the population?
Right.
And like, I really thought that people would sign up for our party in a big way, and that hasn't happened. And that's been very, very disappointing. But I think there's an element, like, quite often people will reach out to me and say, where are you guys? And I didn't know you existed. And we have a bit of a catch-22, because sometimes having more money would allow us to publicize more, like more marketing. And then with more marketing, we'd have more members, and more members talk to other people, and like it become a virtuous circle. But we're not there yet. So, I mean, I tried. Well, I think I reached out to Gad twice to say, look, if you want to talk to somebody who gets your concern about the tax level, right, bring me on, right? And then, because it would, I know it's self-serving from my point of view, because I think it would give me immense exposure, and but it would help him as well, because if he doesn't give directly or indirectly a boost to libertarians, the tax, like, he's not going to pay any less taxes in the near future. I mean, let's face it, it's not. I mean, we have a government that grows like a cancer, where taxes are going up again, and they never come down. So if you want taxes to come down, you got to vote libertarian. You don't really have a choice. And if I were him, like, Gad, if you're listening to this, get me on your show so we can talk, taxes.
Yes. Actually, that's a great idea. And I should. Well, right now I'm really heavy into work, so I'm not sure if I can do it right away, but I definitely I'll do whatever I can anyways to try to help that situation. Because my biggest concern, and let me know if this is something that you're concerned with as well, is the prominent voices. And once again, I have a lot of respect for them, for at the very least, I agree with them on their pushback against the status quo and the establishment. But my major concern is humanity. In the last few hundred years, you've only had one or two opportunities. The last opportunity to do something tremendous in terms of getting people thinking in a totally different manner, in terms of how you live in a society and how you maintain peace and how you have law and order and all this stuff, was after the Enlightenment era, and a bunch of, fine folks from across the pond that traveled over here. And, we're talking about the founding fathers of the US. And, they drafted, I think at the time, was probably the most amazing document in all of human history, in terms of putting forth and laying out kind of what it means to be not just a free human being, but what you need to do to sustain those freedoms. And yes, those kind of things makes people very uncomfortable. But my concern, once again, is that if we end up like people like Jordan Peterson and Gadside, as much as I have tremendous amount of respect for them, like you say, but without the philosophy of liberty, without that kind of knowledge, I think we just end up with the pendulum going back to the old style of conservatism. The conservatives have been out of power in terms of having the structural power in institutions for a long time. And so they're desperate to get that power back. But my concern is that what they're mostly concerned about? Now, I'm sure there are other aspects of it that affects them and other people in their life that they would like to change. But if we just end up with statism light for a while, you still end up in, well, I mean, think about it. The founding fathers set up the smallest government on the planet, and look at how it's the largest thing on the planet now, right? So we know that just, believing in statism is not going to work. You might have a temporary time while the pendulum's swinging back where there might be at least some reprieve, but rest assured, you're going to end up back enslaved socially and economically, but just by a different gang or group. Whereas if you bring libertarians to the forefront and the philosophy and the core principles, right? Whether you want to describe yourself as a libertarian, an anarchist, a voluntarist, at least people get that light bulb moment and they actually understand to the core what it is to be a free human being and how your rights are not granted to you by government. Most Canadians today, and I don't even hear, like I say, people like a lot of the prominent voices pointing out that no, your rights are just natural and inherent by sheer fact of you being born on this planet. And that's the kind of information that people like you or people like myself really needs to bring to the forefront. And like I say, I think that kind of intellectual enlightenment would be very much resonating with people from all different backgrounds and stripes, because it's something completely new rather than the left versus right. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I completely agree. The danger when it comes to now to be fair,
Mhm.
Pierre Poilievre is speaking a good game right now.
Yep.
This was maybe 2 years ago. He was on Jordan Peterson, and he was certainly quoting some books that I have read from the right
Yep.
people, like Hayek and Mises,
Mhm.
and so he knows these people, and
Right.
which I dare say is is a mile better than Trudeau, who
Mhm.
I don't think even knows who these people are, right? So
No.
at least, but power, they say power corrupts, and the
Mhm.
danger is once he's in power. I mean, so I'll give you an example where, like I hope what he's saying he's going to act upon. But
Right.
his party voted the other day for something that's fundamentally anti-freedom. So when he says he wants to make Canada the freest country in the world, and
Mhm.
then I see the way they voted, I'm thinking, no, Pierre, you just shot yourself in the foot. And the one I'm talking about is this legislation that is basically an anti-scab law, right? This was to address the latest strike at the port in Vancouver. And I think the bill covers jobs or elements that are covered the federal jurisdiction, where basically if you go on strike, you cannot be replaced, right? You cannot have replacement workers.
Mhm.
And from a libertarian point of view, like, it's very simple. Let's say that you think it's demeaning to work for $30 an hour or whatever the number is, right?
Mhm.
You certainly don't have the right to stop somebody who's currently earning 15, to apply for your job. I mean, for that person, that would be doubling their salary, right? These are the considerations that are never, ever considered when making these decisions. Like, to them, it's all about, I mean, it's a bit like Bastiat about the seen and unseen. What
Mhm.
is seen here is the guy who's on the picket line who doesn't want to have his job stolen from him, which of course gives him tremendous leverage in terms of negotiating.
Mhm.
But what about the guy who would better himself, or make himself better off considerably by being able to apply for that job and get it? Right? That's never considered. So that
Yeah.
was a terrible, terrible decision. It's fundamentally anti-freedom. Again, my point is, you want to go on strike, you have the right to do so, but you
Right.
don't have the right to stop somebody from taking a job that you've left vacant. Right?
Right.
Like, that's fundamental freedom, and yeah, they failed on that one. So it makes me wonder. We his predecessors were absolutely, his two predecessors, O'Toole and Scheer, were horrible, because then we were looking at basically the Liberal Party but disguised in blue.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So to your point is, yeah, we can have temporary changes that move the needle a little bit, but boy, it's
Mm.
The past, in the investment world, they say that it's not necessarily indicative of future performance, but people should be aware of their history.
Yes, you're right. Well, that's the thing. Well, the one thing I will say about the Americans, and of course, they're out in front of us. They typically are, especially when you talk about stuff like this, but that's part of their culture. And I think that, to me, is the key driver here is that, and once again, I'll have to quote Andrew Breitbart in terms of the whole politics being downstream of culture. So in terms of Pierre Poilievre and any party that's, vying for power in Canada today, is they're polling. Everything's about polling because they want to know where the people are at in order to, appease them and to pull them and draw them in based on the fact that they want to reflect what the people want. And the problem with Canada, as you're well aware of, is the people want, or at least a sizable enough portion of this country that keeps these establishment parties in power, a sizable enough portion of them want the welfare state. They want to maintain the status quo. They want rampant wealth redistribution. They want the economy to be managed from the top down, because a lot of Canadians, sadly and unfortunately, have benefited tremendously, of course, at other people's expense, typically, as a result of that. So that's the key driver here, where I think, and like I say, the Americans are doing better now in terms of drawing in the culture and getting the people, because you're never going to, I think Pierre Poilievre is going to continue to, like, he'll throw some red meat to libertarians because he's going to want our vote too. But that's, once again, the polling is showing him, well, he needs that, not just the PPC, but libertarians, that few percent, but that few percent, is a tremendous advantage to him. But is he going to continue to, is he going to implement any kind of policy that would even be remotely geared towards libertarianism? Probably not, because once again, that's a small portion of the sampling of all the people that they're polling that he's wanting to draw in, right? So what do we got to do? And that's, to, once again, a question to you is, what do we got to do to help shift the culture? And I personally believe, like, a lot of that stuff has to happen at the community level, of putting on events, of doing things that you're drawing people in to talk about things that they find uncomfortable, but they walk away from with expanded knowledge and a real meaningful purpose in life, when they see that it's not just a matter of checking off a box, but we want to actually work and function to structure our societies in a manner where we're advancing. I've even coined the phrase, Enlightenment Era 2.0, right? How about we just, rather than doing the left, right, back and forth, like, let's see what we can do in this modern information age in terms of actually advancing the philosophy of liberty and libertarian values, which I believe in the future, it's either going to be tyranny or it's going to be, liberty. And liberty has to be driven by the people who actually understand the most, which are libertarians.
Yeah. Well, I have sort of two answers. One that suits my character. I came to be, Murray Rothbard once said that libertarians are born. Now, he said they may not know right away that they are libertarians, but eventually will find out.
Right.
Now, I've only been a libertarian for, a little over 20 years. And the way it happened was, to me, very interesting. In my early 40s, I was subscribing to an investment newsletter, and one day there was a link to an article that appeared on Mises.org.
Okay.
Now, I couldn't tell you what it was, but what is crystal clear in my mind was that whatever it was, the article on Mises.org presented a point of view or an argument that was so much better than anything I had ever heard in terms of explanation before, that I decided to go back. And for years and years and years, I would go on Mises.org every morning, read the one or two articles. And after a little while, I became a libertarian because I could no longer defend my previously held beliefs. So this is one example in terms of bringing people to libertarianism, is to expose them to arguments that are coherent, that are internally consistent, that have been proven. I mean, again, there's so much beliefs that are wrong, like when people talk about any sort of prohibition, right? Like, the vast majority of people have never read anything about the experience in the 1920s in the US, right? I have read quite a bit. In fact, I read an entire book on it, and it's amazing what a disaster it was. I mean, people don't even know that alcohol consumption went up during Prohibition, not down. And of course, organized crime went up, and homicides went up, and it was a complete disaster.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, and I would say, because people are ignorant of what happened in the past, of course, they're very prompt to advocate for things that have been tried and failed before.
Mm-hmm.
So this type of, factual argument will bring some people to libertarianism.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, and again, I am usually quite transparent. I am not a particular emotive person. My ability to try to hook people in through emotion is certainly not one of my forte, and I have to surround myself with people who have that gift, if you wish. But that is one element where, sort of an emotional response, and again, not based on nonsense, but I'm talking about trying to appeal to people's sense of, yes, I would rather be free than a prisoner, type of thing, where we need, or I need to do a better job. There's no doubt. But in terms of the information, I mean, if you seek it, you will find it, because whether it's the Foundation for Economic Education in the U.S. or
excellent site,
right, or Mises, or even the well, the name escapes me right now, but there's all kinds of sites that
Cato?
Probably
not Cato. I'm just throwing.
Well, I was there's a certain element of Cato, yes, that can help, and then there's the American
AIER.
That's right.
Jeffrey Tucker and the yep.
Yeah, right. That's another good one. If people want to educate themselves, and again, you don't have to start reading massive amount of books. You can do what I did, which is go to Mises Daily, read the 1 or 2 articles, and within a year, I would be willing to bet that your views on a lot of things that are happening will change dramatically, because a lot of the belief system today is based on lack of education, lack of economic education, lack of history, lack of knowledge of economic history. I mean, like anybody who believes, because the Liberal government is a prime example of this, that central planning works, is completely deluded. I mean, you have to actually be completely ignorant of economic history, or you know that it never worked, but it suits your purpose to continue to advocate for it, and therefore you're lying to people. There are only 2 options. You are either ignorant or lying, and neither of which is acceptable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jacques, once again, I mean, we haven't had much in terms of past interactions, but you've proven to me already, and this is actually giving me a little bit of hope, is libertarians generally, I mean, ones that have been, libertarians for long enough to be able to fully articulate their thoughts and have gathered enough information to be able to figure this stuff out. I tell you, I'll say it right now, your ideas, the platform of even the party, like all of that stuff, it's solid as all get out, and it's a Herculean task for anyone, and for the people that try, I mean, good on you, but good luck trying to take down the philosophy of liberty. It's just the ideas are just so solid and grounded in objective reality and logic and reason, and just morally consistent, ethically consistent premises and principles. But once again, our problem is we have that in spades, right? It's like we're walking around. We're the Tysons in the political world, or at least sorry, you'd be the Tyson in the political world in terms of libertarians here. I'm not really in the political side of things as it is, but you're the Tyson guy, but you're the Tyson guy that no one has ever heard of the name Tyson. That's the problem is I believe the idea is that you folks at the Libertarian Party and people like myself that bring to the table are rock solid and would be accepted and embraced by a sizable portion, right? I'm not sure how many initially, but eventually I think it would be something that would catch on greatly and tremendously, especially after all the crap that everyone's gone through in the last few years. Once again, the number one problem that I see is our inability to get our voices out there, because I don't know whether it's through suppression. I know myself, my videos used to get way, way more views than they do these days. I find now some of it could just be myself, right? I might have, caused my own harm to my own brand in the past by straying and talking with people at the PBC. So people felt like I, diluted myself in some way. I can't say there's no way for me to know these things, but I do know that those of us that have been trying to get our voices out there are having a really, really difficult time to do so, which is why, and once again, listen to people like Dave Smith and Michael Malice and others. I see, and it's great to have those folks to listen to their ideas, because once again, we're all benefactors of that. But I do see where it's probably a wise thing to follow in their footsteps in some way, and try to seek out people with prominent voices that do have access to, the normies in society, or predominantly at least people who are, accustomed to the establishment of the status quo in terms of political parties. Because once they've heard ideas, once they've heard someone like yourself, Jacques, I am quite confident, even if you were sitting on a stage with someone like Godside, and once again, not to be, not to be, one up, not because of one-upmanship, but I could see how when God or Jordan are talking about things, how you could clarify things in a manner that Jordan's really good in terms of bringing certain things to the table, right? What I think Jordan is excellent at is he brought, psychology and religion and how that kind of develops and how that associates with philosophy as well. I like how he's brought all that stuff together. And of course, God with the parasitic mind and bringing his own, not psychology, but I forget exactly what he does, but his academic, prowess and power.
Evolutionary psychology.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. Evolutionary psychology. So yeah. So once again, and I love how they bring that to the table, but once again, it takes someone that understands the philosophy of liberty and bring that to the forefront and kind of amalgamate that into some of the things they're bringing. And I think you or someone else that had the chance to sit on the stage or have a big audience with these people could really clarify things tremendously, because from what I get, and I pay astute attention to, like your Jordan Petersons and your Godside, but I think at the end of the day, all we end up with is just, getting rid of the establishment, but we're just going to bring in another whole new establishment. Now, there might be some opportunities along the way or in the interim, but I think those folks could really help us if they would at least give us access to, their audience, so that we could have the capacity and the ability to get our ideas out there.
Amen. I mean, it would be great. I mean, the fact is that right now, never mind, advancing in a big way the cause of freedom and liberty. We have, in my opinion, a more pressing problem right now, is that we have to stop the current onslaught. And I'll tell you something that happened to me recently, which really made me kind of sit up. We were in southern BC, and we were staying at a B&B. Okay. Turns out that the owner of the B&B, a couple, defected from Czechoslovakia in 1986. Mm-hmm. The way they managed to do it, like, it's one of those hair-raising experiences. It takes a lot of guts. But they managed to get out. But they were telling me, and again, you have to pay attention to people who have been there before. Mm-hmm. And the guy said, I smell communism in the air in this country, mm-hmm. right? Again, when people know what they're talking about because they've been there, right? They recognize the signs. We ought to pay attention. Like, mm-hmm. in other words, and he would have said to me that things have gotten a lot worse over the last 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. That there's this creeping element. Like, I'm not interested in listening to the self-proclaimed Laurentian elites with their laptop at their cottage or whatever, telling me that everything is fine. Like, those, for one thing, those people are the ones who love to boss people around and get involved in our lives or whatever. I will take the word of somebody who's been there before and who recognizes the sign. People have got to wake up, because what's happening right now is terrible. Things are getting worse by the day, not better. And the big element of that is, of course, on the economic side, but on the freedom side, I mean, if you consider some of the bills that the Liberals are working on, that, among other things, would make it a crime to have thoughts that where you haven't actually committed a crime yet, but now it would be a crime to actually have bad thoughts towards certain people. I mean, that is beyond the pale. But
Yeah, that's Bill C-36, I believe you're talking about, right?
yeah, no, exactly,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Or yeah, I mean, that people in government would actually think that this is a moral thing to do is
Mhm.
unimaginable. But that's where we're going, and
Mhm.
we have to put a stop to this. Like that, to me, that's the first immediate element, is that we have to put an end to this nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah, well, when you're talking about that stuff, I'm so with you there, and I think what's most disturbing to me is the fact that we live in the information age is this is not new. Just pointing out the fact, in terms of these people that in the modern day that think, especially in the information age, to think that it's even possible, right? I mean, they can cause some harm for sure, but it is literally impossible for them to, make it so that nobody can learn or gain any knowledge. But the fact that they're willing to try it, I just, because there's nothing new under the sun in terms of, like, how important, standing up for your inherent rights and freedoms are. I mean, this has happened so many times throughout history, and the fact that this kind of knowledge and the ability to instill and enshrine this kind of stuff in the people. To me, if you're supposed to, the whole point of education, right, is supposed to educate and inform people, and to give them supposedly not just academics but enlightened knowledge in terms of what it is to be a modern man and woman. But nobody is getting that. Hollywood has greatly let people down. Hollywood is actually, in terms of the arts and entertainment, is one area that is very much appealing to not just young people but old people like, and where it should be. Now, we don't have a Hollywood to the north per se, but those are areas in music and stuff like that. Those are things that can give people subtle hints without having to go to a lecture, because some people like to go to a lecture. Tens of thousands of people will go line up to listen to Jordan Peterson, but millions of people would go to watch a movie that would have some of those underlying premises and theories instilled or placed in them. That's the beautiful thing about people with that artistic background, which unfortunately I don't have, but where they can bring that to the forefront in a way that people can get it and be entertained while they're being enlightened and learning some great values. So that's another area. I'm not sure if you're familiar with anyone in Canada that where we could, but once again, that's an area where you would require money. But in terms of if they want to have, like, with C-36, right? Or was it C-11? Whichever one, anyways, is trying to bring about more Canadian content. As much as I loathe the idea of government dictating but if you want Canadian, well, to me, Canadian content should be, well, let's try to talk about what it is to be free here in Canada. Because so far, even after living to the north of our neighbors for, as long as we have, for hundreds of years, in the grand scheme of things, a lot of Canadians still haven't learned a lot of the things that the Americans learned hundreds of years ago. And that's kind of a sad state of affairs. We kind of resemble their economics in some degree, in some regard, because they're a big giant powerhouse to the south, but we're severely lacking in terms of their culture.
Yeah, there are huge differences indeed. Yes, on that front.
Is it possible, though, to bring, I know that the media and stuff, they try to pump up anti-American narratives, but in the real world, when you're out there, a lot of Canadians actually admire, whether they will admit it or not, but they admire a lot of things about American, because they try to duplicate and replicate it in so many areas, in so many regards. So I believe, but what I want to know if your thoughts, is it possible? Is it that Canadians were just seemingly, right, I don't know, a different breed entirely, or do you believe that it's completely possible that Canadians, given the right kind of cultural drivers and some economic support to back that up and to bring that stuff to fruition, do you even believe that it's possible to get at least a sizable enough portion of Canadian people to be willing to embrace and adopt, the philosophy of liberty?
Well, I suppose I wouldn't be in this business if I didn't think it was possible. I mean,
Right.
I I have to believe that there are people who, although again, I go back to COVID and the response to me was disappointing. You
Mhm.
know, one of the things that, well, let me share. I, I found this to be so interesting, because I think it helps at least raise your awareness of certain elements of psychology that are going on in the public. So last year I read this book called Collective Illusions.
Okay.
And in the book, which I highly recommend, but in the book, early on, he's describing how apparently, from an evolutionary psychology point of view, we are wired to conform. Okay, so there might have been, or probably was, evolutionary advantages to conform to the hunter-gathering group that we belong to, and what have you. Now, the result of this is that if you go and ask people for their opinions, they will tell you, they will lie most of the time, in order to conform to what they think the majority of people think. Okay.
Right.
Now, in the book, I'll share two examples. The first one was a place in the U.S. that had been founded by the Pilgrims that still has a certain religious fervor to it. And the question to the people was, is it okay to play cards? And to a household, like, they would go from household to household, is it okay to play cards? The answer was no, it's totally inappropriate. Turns out that almost all of those people behind closed doors were playing cards. Okay? But they stated that it was inappropriate because they were convinced that the vast majority of people thought it was a sin. Okay.
Right.
Turns out that the vast majority of people played cards. Okay. So people were conforming not to reality, but what they thought reality was. Okay. Second example, during apartheid in South Africa, something like 67% of white people behind closed door thought it was perfectly appropriate for their white child to play with a black kid. And yet, if you ask them, 100% of them would tell you it was inappropriate because they thought, again, that the majority, thought differently than they did when in fact. So all of this is to say, based on these examples, is that I think that we live in an era right now where there is indeed a complete misunderstanding on the part of the majority of Canadians as to what other people believe.
Right.
Like my advice to Canadians would be that if you are a reasonable, rational person and you believe a certain way, chances are you are with the majority. Don't get yourself fooled by thinking that the majority actually thinks differently. I mean, to me, the biggest example of this right now is this whole thing about transgenderism. I think the vast majority of Canadians are saying this is nonsense. And yet, if you were to ask them, unfortunately, a large percentage would actually align with what they think the majority is, when in fact, it's not the majority. Those are very vocal, very strident minority,
right?
Who gives the sense that that's the majority speaking. But that's just an example among many. So when it comes to freedom, again, I think that some people, for some reason, believe that a certain element of constraint on our freedom, in order to allow the government to do this or to give the government the power to do that. Just last night, I think I posted on X that, this was Trudeau's latest announcement of hundreds of millions of dollars being given to some countries around the world to help them with gender policies mixed in with climate change and all that. And of course, I mean, I tweeted that it is totally inappropriate. It was never the role of government to give our money to other countries on our behalf. The idea is, don't take our money in the first place, and we as individuals will decide if there are causes abroad that we want to support. Again, it was never ever the plan for the government to take our money and basically dictate where it's going to go. It's complete nonsense. But if you were to ask people, again, how many of them would say, well, it kind of makes sense that the government will take my money, and instead of letting me decide how to spend it, that they ought to spend it on my behalf. But if I had a 5-minute discussion with them, maybe I could convince them that being allowed to use their money as they see fit, because of course they know better than anybody else how their money should be used. Right? But another thing that we have to fight is the indoctrination that takes place in school. I mean, let's face it, there's not a lot of libertarian philosophy being taught
No,
in school, right? I
definitely.
mean, most kids are completely ignorant of it.
Mhm.
Like, and even I would say more conservative viewpoints are probably never discussed,
Mm.
right? So
Yeah,
with kids, from the time they're 5 or 4, all they hear is like, we need the state, and if we didn't have the state, things would be terrible. And of
right.
course, this is not true at all, but that's what they hear. So we have to undo a lot of brainwashing.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying, actually, it kind of gives me, and I've kind of thought along those lines too, is you're giving me a little bit more hope, a little bit of a more of a white pill moment here for me, because so what that really means, if you read between the lines and extrapolate from there, is what it means is most people, right, which in a democracy is what matters, right? Most people are conducive to trying to conform, but it's not just conform for the sake of conform, but conform under some pretense that it's for benevolent reasons or for something that they perceive to be as the good, right? So really that's kind of a good thing. You wouldn't really want people to be susceptible in this modern world we live in, the 21st century, susceptible to conforming to things that they outright knew were terrible or detrimental to their fellow citizens. So the fact that at least they believe, falsely I'll add, that they're doing so for some benevolent reason or out of some goodness tells me if we could just get the ideas of liberty into the lexicon, that right, why, how easy, as far as I'm concerned anyways, and let me know, push back on this if you wish, is what a great substitute for woke or all these kind of identity politics, right? Where people, the young people, feel like because they don't have God in their lives, but they feel that they should be virtuous in some way and do something good for their fellow man. Well, what better thing can you do to your fellow man or other person is to not just treat them the way you'd want to be treated and respect their sovereignty and their individuality, but to give them the tools that's going to make them the best kind of person going forward. Because I know as a dad, I'm not sure if you're a dad, but I know as a dad, the best thing I did for my kids wasn't hand them everything they wanted, but to teach them the importance of self-sufficiency, some independence, while still, obviously working in the community and being able to work within teams and groups. But what that does for a person's self-esteem and their ability to achieve full adult status, right? I find a lot of young people today, even in their 20s and 30s, hell, people in their 40s and 50s, they're adult bodies, but they're living still almost like they're in an adolescent stage in their mind, right? Whereas once you've taught someone to become an adult and not to think that, you need authoritarian mommy or daddy to redistribute, but hey, you take that personal responsibility on yourself and you'll feel much, much better about it. If you want to help support other people, you take that onus on yourself, that personal responsibility, and that will be much more rewarding than just offloading that responsibility to a politician.
Well, again, I can't disagree. I mean, if you consider that, say, 150 years ago, by the time you were 21, you probably had a couple of kids and you'd been working for 3 or 4 years.
Right.
Boy, that changes the way you approach life than if you're 30 and you're still living in your basement or your parents' basement. I mean, I obviously don't think that the government can do anything particularly well, but one element where clearly they've done well is to made large segment of the population completely dependent on the government, right? Where they're no longer independent from that point of view, and it's pervasive. I mean, just this morning I was reading that the CEO of WestJet was commenting on how airlines shouldn't really have to pay for excuse me, airport fees or whatever those fees are, that somehow it should be paid by taxpayers. I mean, that's the type of, it makes me laugh when people say, well, capitalism is a failure or free market is a failure. We don't have free market. We have corporatism in a massive scale where, again, all kinds of industries are dependent on the government in order to survive. I mean, none of this should be happening. None of it. But again, it's been now part of the scene for so long that people think it's normal. Like, at my age now, I often have to catch myself because, like, when I hear that, I don't know, 70% of kids below the age of 30 have never heard of the Holocaust, or know about World War II. I mean, I find that very, very, very frightening because when you ignore history, you're bound to repeat it, as they say. So again, there's an element of showing people a totally different philosophy out there that they've never heard of before that is much, much better.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. And the beautiful thing about, well, from my perspective anyways, in terms of libertarianism, I tend to use the word or use the term, the philosophy of liberty, because I think it's at the philosophical level, really, when you're talking about, libertarianism. I mean, sure, it resonates in the political realm, of course, but to me at the core, right, just like the whole expression, it takes 6 months, once you learn about because the principles themselves kind of lead you in the direction, right? And the philosophy of liberty, to me, or libertarianism, is something that could easily replace, when I think of the young people today, okay, yes, and I kind of agree with Jordan Peterson and some of those folks. Yes, I do believe Christianity is vastly superior, obviously, to the state. That's a no-brainer. But mysticism can also leave the mind open and susceptible to some terrible things, as we know in the past, right? When religion, the right wing or the religious Christian, right, were the ones that were the more tyrannical in terms of trying to control and dictate how people live, right, from the top down. Whereas those three very, like, you don't even need the full 10 commandments. Not saying that those aren't great by themselves or stand alone, but just the three major principles, well, self-ownership, property rights, and the non-aggression principle, those three core principles of the philosophy of liberty alone are just, when I think about, if you were to, whether it's one person wouldn't matter, but whether it's 10 people, 100 people, if you all landed on an island together and everyone had a firm grasp or understanding of just those three core principles of libertarianism, that alone is enough. Doesn't guarantee anything, of course, because humans still have free will. They're still susceptible. We're all fallible, right, to doing things that are improper. But that baseline knowledge, to me, that's in the mathematic realm. That's at least understanding the fundamentals in terms of, multiplication, addition. So if you understand self-ownership, property rights, and the non-aggression principle, I think that's a great way for people, at least in the absence of some authority, whether it's God or government, right? In the absence of some authority, those principles that are, once again, reinforced by just being morally and ethically consistent and non-contradictory, those things alone are enough to give anybody the basis, the foundation of how you should treat other people in society, socially or economically. And that is something that I think that the libertarians have so much in spades. But once again, our major issue, our major problem is, how the heck are we going to get those ideas out to the people? That's the thing. But I definitely agree with you in terms of all the aspects of what liberty can bring to the table.
It's funny because, are you familiar with the work of Mary Ruwart?
Yep. Oh yeah. I share her stuff profusely. Not as much lately because I'm a little busy now. But yeah, she's awesome. Yeah.
Okay, but see, Mary makes the point that the three principles you enunciated is something that we teach kids in kindergarten.
Right. Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't take stuff that doesn't belong to you. Keep your promises.
Great point.
Be kind or whatever, right? I mean, so and I think the vast majority of parents would share those views, right? I mean, they would teach their children that way. It's just so bizarre that we teach children this, and then we do a 180 at some point where suddenly, no, I can take your stuff, right? Because the government says so, or I can abuse your rights because, well, you have a different viewpoint than I do, and it's a perversion of something that started out well, with children, and suddenly, we don't do that anymore.
Yeah, well, that kind of, actually, I'm glad you brought that point up, Jacques. I'm actually really enjoying this conversation because you're making some excellent points there. But yeah, that kind of takes me and harkens me back even to my youth when I was a kid myself. And whether you could, like, once again, you can extrapolate your own anecdotal experience and think about that on a grander scale at society level with authoritarian mommy daddy government, and then pupils in education being the students, right? So yes, we were told, like, even myself, you don't hit, don't steal. But when I was growing up, now I know things have changed a little bit for the younger people, but I'm going to speak from my own experience, is don't hit, but but yet you were constantly hit, like whether it was parents, teachers, principals. It was violence is not the answer. Yet all the adults, right? I was constantly told that violence is not the answer, but yet the adults constantly and profusely used violence as a means to their end. So I think that's what it is, as subconsciously in some way people grow up realizing that, yeah, it sounds good in theory, but actually in the real world, it seems like this violent stuff works out rather well, or at least it gives people a leg up or an advantage over others. Whereas the state basically does the same thing, right? Even if you're taught in school in some way, in some regard, which I'm not sure it even happens, that, you know, you should treat people with respect and this and that. But once again, if you understand that, well, your teachers, and once again, I don't have anything against teachers on the individual level. Hell, my son's girlfriend is a teacher, right? And you know, she's great, awesome. But you know, if you're constantly told these things, and yet, you know, your paycheck comes as a consequence of theft, right? Which is just absolutely a fact, whether you like it or not. Nobody gave express or implied permission. You have no way to withdraw, right? Otherwise, you would have nothing but the best teachers being supported by people, and the bad teachers would have their funding withdrawn, and they'd have to find work elsewhere. But the state removes that capacity or ability to do that. We can't withdraw our support. We can't withhold it. Otherwise, we're punished or penalized in some way. So yeah, it's the contradictions. But I firmly believe what you said. Yes, as children. So it almost seems that the state, or in the community level, because of contradictory message from parents, is not properly reinforced, and it's not led by example, which is why people, as they grow up, whether it's through the education system or in their household or in their community, is they don't stick to it because they're not seeing that leading by example. They're only seeing, they're hearing the rhetoric, but they're not seeing the reality reflected anyways.
Well, the human mind has an amazing ability to rationalize just about anything, right? So they will contradict their starting principles in order to achieve a certain end. And by the way, just to expand a little bit on the same book, the author pointed out something that I thought was very interesting in terms of helping me understand how come, you know, Trudeau had managed to get away with a number of things that would have had me, or Pierre Poilievre for that matter, run out of town.
Right.
So he was saying that when you measure the morality of an action, if you got your head screwed on right, you agree or would agree that an action will be measured on its own merit, right?
Mm-hmm.
In others, doesn't matter who did it, right? It's the action itself that will determine whether it was moral or not.
Mm-hmm.
But in the book, he says a lot of people get it backwards. First of all, they will start with a self-assessment, and they will say, I'm a good person.
Mm-hmm.
And then they will say, well, because I'm a good person, then everything I do has to be good. Now, it's a non sequitur. It doesn't follow at all, but they get tricked that way, which is why, you know, someone like Trudeau, who's so self-righteous, it gets away with things because it's not just him, but many of his followers have fallen into that trap as well, right? Like,
Right.
Justin is our guy. He's a great guy. Therefore, everything he does has to be, if not completely okay, it can't be that bad, right? So he did blackface. Well, you know, like, Justin's a good guy, so it couldn't have been that bad, right? But they would never, ever have come to that conclusion if I had done it or if Poilievre had done it, right? Because suddenly, because we are bad people, then everything that we do has to be bad. I mean, that's also part of the framework in which we operate right now, right? Where I find people on the left love to demonize anybody who disagrees with them, because that way they don't have to even engage in the arguments or debate or whatever, right? Like, you're not worthy to debate because you're clearly evil, which of course is not true at all. It's amazing to me. I'm always a bit fearful of finding that the grass was greener 100 years ago, but my sense is that 100 years ago, people were much more willing to engage in arguments. And I'm talking positive arguments, you know, debating the pros and cons, and without without having a knee-jerk reaction of slurring people.
Right.
But from the left, that's all we hear. Like, it's slurs, like, oh, you're a white supremacist, you're a racist, you're a misogynist. I mean, Trudeau, I mean, it boggles the mind to think that his first reaction to the Freedom Convoy was to say, well, most of these people are misogynist and racist. Right? He didn't even know these people, right? I mean, this is just slurring people to demonize them so that then you can do anything to them because it's justifiable, because you're dealing with demons.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I believe in terms of how that went, and that's the sad part of it all too, is the ones that are supposed to be the media, who are supposed to be the ones to hold power to account. That's literally to me the most important aspect of their occupations, as far as I'm concerned. But that's the situation you find yourself in now, is where you have the people who are in the media see themselves as a reflection of someone like Trudeau, and they identify on the same political spectrum, in the same area of that political spectrum as them. So they therefore don't want to, bring down the man that represents their own views. That's the problem. So they're unwilling to challenge him in any way. Whereas if you had someone that was actually willing to push back against or point out his contradictions and all this stuff in the media, and you had at least a general consensus of the fact that they were willing to do that stuff, I think that would be a substantial. And that's probably the biggest reason why there is this rise in alternative media, and the reason why people like you and I talk about these things, and why long form podcasts have become so popular, is because obviously there is at least a sizable portion of people, I don't know how big in numbers they are in particular, but that are yearning for some genuine nuance rather than just short 5-minute or 5-second talking points, and without anyone being challenged. Because that's what I've noticed a lot today. And I watch a lot of established media, not because I enjoy it, but because I like to see what's going on, what's taking place, and what's worthy of pushing back against. But it's everything today is just basically everything. It's just lobbing softballs on a continuing, ongoing basis. So the obviously the young people, or even old people, anyone that's watching the media, they're not getting anything of substance in terms of being able to have those ideas or premises challenged. And then when they're going to their education system, they're predominantly being educated, informed by other like-minded people that fall into that same trap, in that same category. So there's a huge giant vacuum and void out there of the knowledge or the pushback that I believe would actually be quite intriguing. I believe not just young people, but I believe a lot of people are really, really chomping at the bits and trying to figure out what the hell, what's going next. But all the establishment, or those in media, or the drivers of the culture, all they have on offer is this team's bad. Go for the the left's bad right now. They're the bad. Go for the right, or the right that are saying, or the people on the left that are saying the other. Whereas no one's getting any nuance. It's just Leafs versus Canadians, right? Right. Basically, it's just, and it's like, but there's a lot to it, right? How about the people on the team? How about how they're funded? How about, there's so many other aspects of what makes people successful, or what is good in terms of on the moral side of things. But that people don't want to hear that. It's all tribalism. It's never ending, nonstop identity politics. It's us versus them. And that, to me, I find is the most disturbing part. Is that's it really at the core. That is, and because it's parroted by those in academia, right? Comes from the top down, from the politics and the media, the education system and all that. And it's reinforced, is nobody is getting any of that nuance. It's a big giant vacuum out there. And I'm hoping, like I say, that the Libertarian Party can do something to step up and get their voices out there so that people can get access to it, because I believe it will resonate with a lot of people. I think what you've already said so far would resonate. I'm seeing even today, just looking up here in the corner, like we're getting a nice number of views here today. So people are obviously interested in this stuff, and they realize that, because a lot of people are thinking about this stuff is, we'd like to pretend, some libertarians, I'll even admit I was guilty of it in the past, is, we can just do things on the sidelines and do our thing. But no, politics is front and center right now, right? It is the bully pulpit. And if you don't have access to it at all in any shape or form, well, once again, can you hear a tree in the woods when it's falling if you're not there? It's the same thing. So what libertarians, are doing now, and what they should be doing in the future, that's not up to me to decide, but I'm sure you'll come up with lots of ideas. And if you want to bounce those ideas off me and talk to me in the future about this stuff, and I'll do whatever I can to help, once again, because that, to me, I'm being very pragmatic these days, and I firmly understand. And I'll just mention that too for the folks that are in the stream, like Jacques was saying. And I'm not asking for anything myself. I'm back working. I'm doing okay, but by the jump, boys and girls, if you could help out the Libertarian Party of Canada in some way, and I'll lead by example, right? I've already done so in the past, but I've been a little bit lackluster in recent times. But I'm going to step up my game here, and like I say, lead by example and help support and reach out further to not just Jacques here, but other people that are representatives, because it's a very thankless and not the most rewarding job in the world to be part of a party that has the greatest ideas, but basically have no or very minimal in terms of platform, very minimal in terms of economic prowess or stacks of piles of money to support you, sustain you. But that's really at the end of the day what we need is we need Jacques and the other fine folks at Libertarian Party to be properly incentivized and rewarded, right? And I believe that alone, well, just like with anything in the market, right? Everyone, most of us out here, we got jobs. If you get a raise or somebody gives you something, for what you've offered, and they reward you in some way, well, that's a great reason for that person to be inspired to go even further and to do even greater things. So that's, I think, what we should be doing is helping Jacques and the Libertarian Party of Canada, and even at your provincial levels, and helping these folks so that they can put on events and maybe get access to some venues and some other prominent figures. Because just like Jacques said, yeah, nobody's working for free, and nor would I ever expect, right, someone to do that kind of stuff for free. People need to be properly rewarded and compensated, and whatever we can do to help these fine folks out, I think once again, it'll pay dividends for the rest of us, for our entire lives.
Well, that was beautifully said. Thank you very much for your support and endorsement. That means a lot, because it doesn't happen very often. And I will add, if people want to help, please go to libertarian.ca, sign up as a member. Of course, donations, it's only $10 to join as a member. Donations over and above that would be welcome.
Yeah.
We need, now just to put a little bit of context, and I'm not pointing criticism at predecessor, because he was a very bright guy, and he made a lot of personal financial sacrifices. But I don't know if it was a bad omen or whatever, but I became leader of the party on the date that Trudeau dropped the writ on the last election. So I thought, I don't know what that means. But anyway, so I had very little to do with the last election, but we only have 13 candidates. And following that, as leader, people reached out to me, many people did, and said, look, I wanted to vote for your party, but I got in the voting booth and there was no candidate, right? So I have said to people repeatedly, we are not a think tank, even though many of our members are, like yourself, superbly well-read, right? Like way, way better than the average politician. So we tend to be a little bit more cerebral that way. But the fact is that we are not a think tank. We are a political party. So, and as a political party, what we need, of course, is to give a voice to libertarians. It frustrates me when people want to vote for us and we haven't got a candidate. So I'm urging people, even if I would gladly take what's referred to as paper candidates. So paper candidates are the people who meet the minimum requirement in order to be a candidate, but there would be no expectation on my part that they participate in debates or go door to door or any of this. Like, just having a libertarian candidate would be a big step forward. So if people want to help that way, that would be most welcome. They can reach out to me and see. We have I wrote a couple of how-to pieces on our website on how to become a candidate, what's to be done, to try to break it down into smaller elements. But anyway, again, thank you very much for your endorsement.
No, and it's actually heartfelt, and I mean it wholeheartedly. Because like I say, I know how difficult it is, and to me, the fact that you folks are willing to do it, give Canadians a chance. And I'll just mention out now, because we are getting quite a few views in this one. I'll mention, because a lot of the people that do watch my stuff, I went on. I'm not sure if you're familiar, Jacques, but I when the PBC started and Maxime Bernier, and I had heard some rumblings that he was somewhat libertarian and stuff. I didn't know the man personally, of course, but I thought anything, once again, being pragmatic, anything that can get, libertarians or anything like that, any amount of prominence and some voice or stature out there on the political landscape. So I went on basically a whirlwind thing where I interviewed, I don't know, dozens of their candidates. And I mean, I don't know how many, like countless members and a lot of people. And once again, those at that time, those were the times where my views were in the thousands and tens of thousands of views, which for libertarians is pretty good up here in old Canada. but a lot of those people, I'm sure, still watch me. I know actually a bunch of them too. And I just want to mention to those folks, listen, you folks know me, you've watched me a long time. And as much as, I initially had some respect for Maxime, the fact that he basically, when libertarians like Tim Mullen reached out to him, he basically, gave them the cold shoulder, and everything that he's done since. I'm not saying Max himself, right? I don't like to get into the whole personality thing, but I just don't think that him and his party are the answer. But if you are genuinely, obviously, and most of you people are against the status quo and you want to vote for genuine real change, well, like to me, I would just suggest that PBC would have been much better than anything else the establishment had on offer. But the Libertarian Party is that in spades. It's why go milquetoast if you can support the Libertarian Party. And trust me, like Maxime, the people that voted for him, if those kind of resources, went to the Libertarian Party instead, I'm sure it would be put to even much more better use, to be honest with you. Because once again, the libertarians are the ones that have a real firm grasp when you talk about economics. I guarantee even a $10 donation will be much, much better spent than anything that you could offer, 10 times that to the PPC party. Because at the end of the day, libertarians are in politics for the sake of popularity or for the sake of any kind of ego or because they had a grudge against someone. Libertarians genuinely, for themselves and for everyone they love and care about, for the most part, just want to live in a world where people's sovereignty and individuality are respected, and there are baseline ground rules that are the foundation of how we treat each other, which means, not to use theft, force, violence, coercion, rape, and all that stuff towards each other. The things like Jacques said that we learned as kids, right? So if you genuinely want to support, someone who's going to challenge the status quo, I just ask this, and I plead with you folks, just save your money on Maxime and the PBC. Like they had a go, they had a decent try and attempt at it. But let's give a full-throated, voice of support to the Libertarian Party and people like Jacques, who have been doing this stuff for a long time, and many others I'll add to, and with very little thanks and very little reward for doing so. And once again, I can't imagine how much more I could say that would appease to people. But to me, this is the wisest thing that we can do at this junction, is get the support and the backing behind the folks. And if you want yourself, right? If you want to lead by example, and maybe you don't even, don't want to use it just donations alone, well, you could, like Jacques said, become a candidate, whether it's a paper candidate or any other type of candidate for the Libertarian Party. Because if we can get people in all 338 ridings, or at least as close to that as possible, because you got to remember, folks, there is an election coming up, and it's going to be between now and October of next year, something like that. It's not that far away. And like I say, if we can do something like, kind of replicate a little bit of success, whether we end up, winning the election or not, but if we can have some genuine sway and influence, which once again requires, much needed support, both in terms of, maybe doing videos or getting other people involved, meetings, right? Going to different venues, but the most important thing is we need the financial backing, because all that stuff takes money. So anything that you can do to help the Libertarian Party, Jacques, and anyone else, like I say, whether it's monetarily or becoming a candidate or a supporter or a member, anything you can do. And once again, Jacques, reach out to me anytime you want. Typically, I do most of this stuff now because in the summer months, I'm a construction guy. I actually build the roads, right? So when people say, well, who will build the roads? I will. My company will. No worry. And it's a private company. No government needed or necessary, right? But in the winter months now, things are much quieter, and I could definitely, help out a whole lot more, and I have more time. But like I say, my weekends, now I do have to obviously spend time with my family that I love, but I'm always willing to if you want to reach out to me, or if you have anyone else in the party, whether it's even just lending my platform, helping you financially, discussing things with other members and getting their voices out there, anything I can do, I will definitely do to help the Libertarian Party and you, Jacques, in your future endeavors. And I really appreciate, like I say, for you coming on the show with me today. And if you don't mind, actually, before I let you go, I'll give you a chance to respond. But maybe if you wouldn't mind, maybe read a few comments there before you go too.
Read?
Oh no, yeah, no. I was just going to say, if you don't mind, I'll read a few of the comments there.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Just because there are some people on there in the background here in the comment section, and I usually like to interact quite a bit with my followers and the fellow libertarians. So I'll just check through and see what we got there. So from Super User, I'm Adele, new to the show. Will Polyev be able to improve to tackle the debt, given that the deep state? Might have been a follow-up part of that. So basically, I guess, will Polyev be able to improve or tackle the debt, given that the deep state? So I think you kind of get where the question's going from there. Like, are the people that we don't get to vote for going to have too much influence in terms of what even one of the parties like Pierre Poilievre could bring to the table?
Well, the first thing he's going to have to face, and this is a question again, whether he's going to stick to his principles or not, but he will immediately, the minute, he would even hint at, cutting back on government or whatever, of course, he's going to be accused of austerity. And, they're going to say austerity is a terrible thing. And to which, again, if these people were well equipped in terms of history, I would point them, like if I were an advisor to the Conservative Party, I would say, take a page out of what happened in the early 1990s when the Wall Street Journal was running an article basically calling Canada an honorary member of the third world country because of our debt problem. And what happened? Chrétien basically let Paul Martin loose as finance minister to cut. And of course, the usual naysayers said that this austerity was going to lead to all kinds of problems, and completely the opposite happened. Canada's economic performance was much better than the US for the 7 years that followed. So this whole idea that austerity is going to bring Armageddon, and the thing is, we are going through economic Armageddon as it is. So how people can actually say there would be a bad thing, it's beyond me. But it's all going to be a question of whether he's going to stick to his gun and his conviction. And if he does, yes, there is plenty of stuff that he could cut back on, which would make us better off, not worse off.
Right. Actually, let me follow up on that question there, because you're probably much more knowledgeable in terms of the political side thing than I am. I admit I'm not nearly as knowledgeable on that stuff. So under Canada's parliamentary system, does the leader of the party, so if Pierre Poilievre does form government, and let's say he does get majority, can he, so we're all, I think, or at least most of us are quite familiar with Javier Milei, and apparently, boy, once you become a president of Argentina, there's a sizable amount of power at your disposal, because he's doing a tremendous job down there in terms of eliminating entire departments of government, right? And what we're seeing is actually it's now some of them are trying to spin it from negative or positive ways down there, depending on the media you're talking about. But we're seeing that actually things are actually improving at a fairly quick pace already in Argentina. So you can't help but think that could be replicated here in Canada. So what do you think? Is our parliamentary system conducive with a leader like Pierre Poilievre? If he had the will and he had the majority, could he actually do the kind of things that Javier Milei has done?
The PMO, the Prime Minister office, holds way too much power. Although, to answer your question, in this particular case, it would actually be good, because it's almost dictatorial. Okay. Because the system that we have in Canada is that, first of all, the Senate will pretty much approve anything that the House of Commons. So if you have a majority,
right,
and of course we have a system where dissension from your own members, unlike what happens in the UK, where in the UK they recognize, they have the decency to recognize that you are elected by your constituents, and that you ought to respond to them first, not to your leader. But people in the UK, not like I don't think it happens all that often, but it's not rare either that they will actually go against government policy because they think, with the government, and they don't get ostracized, they don't get kicked out. But in this country, you can't do that, right? If you vote against your government, you're out, right? So that gives the PMO enormous power. So if Pierre Poilievre decided, hey, this department or that department is a goner, it would happen.
Excellent. Well, that's a good thing to know then. Actually, once again, now that there's a double edge to that particular sword for me, and I'm sure it is with you too, is not a big fan of the fact that the PMO has that much power, but for the sake of what we're wanting, right?
That's the way that's why I couched it the way I did, right?
Yeah,
To answer your point, yes, in this case it would be an advantage, but right now,
right.
I mean, many of the things that have happened are been terrible, but because Trudeau has almost absolute power, right?
Yeah, no, once again, I wasn't trying to diminish it in what you say, and I'm glad you explained it that way, because well, that's once again, that's the pragmatic side. Is of course my most staunch principle to me would be to suggest that we should never use political power as a means to an end, but yet our opponents will. So I mean, if you're in that state, in that mind state, and I'm glad I haven't been. I've at least gotten out of that thing, because you're literally shooting yourself in the proverbial foot if you're willing to, restrain yourself from ever using political power when your opponents are going to. That you're just basically, subjecting yourself to the whims of some very bad people. And once again, at least at this point, if you could greatly reduce, if you could use the power of the state to, at least in some way, in some regard, try to shrink in size its power or its scope. I mean, to me, that's a net win, no matter how you look at it. Anyways, let me move on to the next question. But that was a great answer there, Jacques. Really appreciate it. So let me go down to the Dave Dismantle here. He's got libertarians of today are so far off the path they cannot even be called libertarians anymore. I mean, Trump at the U.S. Libertarian Convention, get the fuck out of here. So I mean, I'll just reserve my thoughts on that, because I think I've basically already mentioned it at the very beginning of the show. But what are your thoughts in response to Dave's comment there, Jacques?
Well, I would make the distinction between, I mean, it's not because I'm a libertarian, for example, that, as we've mentioned before, because I don't know exactly where they stand, but would that preclude me from having Gad do an opening statement at a convention, or Peterson? I don't think so. Now, I do think that Trump, who at least I would say is clearly not a libertarian, was over the line, right? I mean, the distinction would be between having someone who's clearly not a libertarian with someone that, well, I'm not quite sure where they stand, is quite different, in my opinion, right? So, yeah, no, I thought it was kind of a strange move on their part, but
okay. All right. Well, I will just add one small thing, actually, because I kind of agree with you there, and what you're saying makes actually perfect sense, except my thoughts on it is whether it comes to fruition or not. But because they did invite Trump to the Libertarian Party convention, once again, it's not like Trump hasn't lied a few gazillion times in the past, but even offered that he might put a libertarian in a position somewhere if he forms government next. And we're kind of all under the understanding that it's either going to be Trump or Biden. It would be awesome. I would love to see the Libertarian Party of the U.S., form the next government of the U.S., but that's probably not going to happen. So the fact that it's going to be Trump or Biden, I kind of see, and Dave kind of helped get me there, but I don't mind the pushback. I'll just mention this too. I love hearing perspective from all over the range. I don't get upset or offended if someone disagrees with me, because that's actually how I help form the proper opinion. I want to hear all kinds of perspective, but I actually think on that, as much as Trump is, very far from a libertarian, but once again, he's a really popular character that has access to, tens of millions of people, over 100 million people, I would suggest, or so. And the fact that he went to the Libertarian Party gave the libertarians, people who typically, like I say, not just sitting in third row, but they're typically at the back of the bus, give them a little bit more prominence in terms of where their stature can be. Because the fact that Trump felt that he had to go there kind of gives the libertarians a little bit of, so you kind of do need us in some way. So it kind of gives them at least a little bit of an advantage in terms of getting their ideas out there into the lexicon. Once again, not that Trump is going to do it, but I think that anything that you can do to get our ideas out there, and even if you do, I'm not saying, and I agree with Dave too, doesn't even mean that you necessarily have to go out and, if you're a staunch libertarian and you just don't want to do the lessers of evil, then just don't vote. But at the very least, he got the ability to get his voice out there to a whole lot. And I believe it was Angela that set it up. She thinks she's the chairman of the Libertarian Party down there. But I actually think it was wise of her to invite not just Trump, but Vivek and RFK, just by sheer fact of getting the attention on the party, because the party, like with you have the ideas, you have the the information that people need, and you even have access to the entire political process from one end of this country to the other, right? And that's a beautiful thing to have. But once again, without the ability to get your voice out there, which is something that someone like Trump brings to the table, I think it's a little more difficult. But anyways, that's just my thought on the things. But if you wanted to actually do a follow-up there, Jacques, before I move on any of that,
No, I think that's good.
Okay, cool. Okay. So Dave, actually it's Dave again here. Hey, Jacques, here's a question. How would small government be paid for?
We are in the middle of reviewing our platform for next year.
Okay.
But we are leaning heavily, and actually I think probably not changing our platform, because I think our platform right now is stating that it would be no income tax, strictly a GST, on the ground that GST is something that people have more control over. Like, in other words, if you really are opposed to any sort of taxation, then you can limit your spending, I guess. But that's the short of it.
Okay, excellent. Right on.
But we would, I would certainly, I'm not going to copy the guy and go around with a chainsaw, but a libertarian government would do an immense amount of cutting at the federal level. In fact, my hope would be to emasculate the government and really limit ourselves, to start with anyway, to a minarchist position. National defense, police, and judiciary. And by the way, they all need, all three of them, very badly to be addressed, because they're every single one of them is a disaster right now.
Yeah.
But there's all kinds of stuff that the government is in that we would completely exit. And of course, if you exit it, then you don't have to pay for it. So
right. And I would actually suggest that there's so much redundant bureaucracy in this country that before you even have to get to the point where you would start getting some of the old people who are relying on some of these unfunded liabilities or these entitlements, I'm sure before you'd even have to get to anything like healthcare, you could do quite a bit of cutting before you'd even have to worry about getting to that point where you would be instilling fear in some of the people that believe that they need these systems in order to sustain them, right?
Well, okay, so here I do have to make a very important distinction, because I am the leader of a federal party, not a provincial one. Okay,
right.
But at the federal level,
right? Actually, that's a good point of distinction. Sorry, yeah. Go ahead.
At the federal level, as you know, the federal government has managed to get into healthcare via the back door and via blackmail. Okay, and what I mean here is that the Constitution is very clear. Other than healthcare for veterans, it is a provincial jurisdiction.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good point. Yeah, I wasn't thinking of that actually. Yeah, because the federal stuff, exactly. But the one, like I say, but at the bare minimum, I mean, are you froze there, Jack? I don't know if you froze up on me. Are you still there? Can you hear me? What's going on here? Seem to be having some issue with the internet. Let's see if we can't clear this up here. Well, it might just clear up here. Just one sec. I'll just go on to the next question, or it might be just a comment. The problem with Canadian art is that it's subsidized by the government. Oh, that's true. And when artists get free money for producing crap, they have no monetary incentive to work hard or to make innovation. Well, that's a great point, and thanks for joining the stream, Gato. I really appreciate that. I agree that the Canadian art is heavily subsidized. I believe we lost Jacques there. Oh, he's back. Let me just bring him back on. Hey, Jacques.
Sorry about that. My Firefox crash for a moment.
Ah,
So let me
sure. Yeah.
so let me finish. So the federal
Yep.
government has managed to get into healthcare via the back door because of its taxing power. Okay.
Right.
In other words, the the taxing power of the federal government vastly exceeds its responsibility,
Mm,
constitutional responsibility. So
right.
that's why they have billions and billions of dollars every year that they can transfer to the provinces, right? But in
Right.
order to do that, they said, sorry, not in order to do that, but they said to the provinces, look, you can have access to billions of dollars we're going to transfer you as
Mm,
long as you basically do what you're told. And when it comes to healthcare, it's those 5 conditions of the Canada Health Act. Okay.
mm,
A federal government under my leadership would actually transfer that taxing power to the provinces. Well,
mm,
we're not going to start again blackmailing provinces. I would like to see provinces actually compete with one another on
mm.
healthcare by trying different things as opposed to this top down, federal government knows best, which is of course not true at all.
Yeah.
Um, so that alone would reduce federal taxes massively. Now, you could argue, probably rightly, that provincial taxes would go up, but that would be at their level. And of course, it's one step at a time, right? My first
Mm,
thing is to limit the size of the federal government, and
mm.
hopefully my counterparts at the provincial level would do the same. But I just want to make clear that that's one of the things that we would do, because
Well,
it is absolutely unconscionable what the federal government has done to the provinces.
excellent. Well, that's a great answer, Jacques. And actually, I would imagine even because if if there was some way that whether like once again in terms of supporting the Libertarian Party, if you guys could get and people could see that the Libertarian Party was getting lots of support, even if you don't believe the Libertarian Party was going to form government at the federal level in the next election, once again, if it could have some ability to greatly influence the Conservatives, because the Conservatives, if they're they have and they know the reason why Maxime Bernier I tried to identify in some ways as a libertarian is because the Conservatives recognize that there's at least a portion of their supporters who might identify as conservative but lean towards libertarian in terms of how they treat the economy and stuff. So I could see how you could convince or help persuade if you were seeing, like, if the polls or people were seeing that the Libertarian Party was seeing some kind of a rise in terms of their numbers and had the ability to pull or draw support away from the Conservatives to at least bare minimally, because once again, I believe the dental care thing that's at the federal level too. And I'm sure you could get them to at least axe that kind of stuff and all the other forced redistribution schemes that they've been coming up under the supply management or the supply agreement that they have with the NDP, correct?
Well, so what they're doing there is unconstitutional because it has nothing to do with, it's not a federal responsibility. That's a
Right.
healthcare issue. That's at the province.
Mm,
But let me add, even if we leave that aside for a minute,
right.
and I could do a presentation for an hour on this, is the
Okay.
sad state of, again, we talked about the demographics before and the state of healthcare. The
Mhm.
fact is, and those are facts, the provinces right now cannot keep the promises made to people on healthcare. You just have to look at waiting lists and things of that nature. The promises are not being kept. So what are they doing? They're doubling down by adding to a set of promises that can't be kept. That to me is an outright lie. You cannot tell people, hey, in addition to not providing you with health care, we're now not going to provide you with dental care. Of course, they don't
Mhm.
present it that way, but you cannot add to a system that is stressed beyond limits already.
Right. Exactly. Excellent point there, Jacques. And that's great. Once again, that's why for me, someone that's not as knowledgeable on the political side of things, that's why it's so great to have someone like yourself to kind of clarify things, because there's one thing I don't like to do, and that's misinform people. I try to stick into my lane as much as I can, right? And I'm very grateful to have you on here. Let's just see what else we got here. So I already kind of dealt with the Gato. He had a comment there, but let's see what else we got there. What do we got here? Neeraj. Hi, this is Neeraj from the BCLP. Oh, so this must be from I assume the British Columbia Libertarian Party. Are you know who this is? Do you there, Jacques? Or
Not familiar with the name, but hello.
okay. Well, I'll just mention that out to you, or make a shout out to you there, Neeraj. And if you would like to, I'd be willing to, if you represent the Libertarian Party in BC. Once again, I'll just mention that I'm willing to talk and engage with anyone that's from the Libertarian Party, whether you're at the provincial level or the federal level, because we really, really need libertarians to get their voice out there and get more prominence and support out there in Canada. And once again, I'm willing to help in any way I can. So thanks for coming and joining the conversation. Oh, he does. I think he has a question there too, Jacques. I better put my glasses on here. Getting older every day, I guess. Don't we have a problem that unqualified voters are making decisions that often have little or no impact on them, and the real stakeholders in society are being tyrannized by majority ignorance? So, yeah, if you wanted to answer with that one there, Jacques.
Well, this is absolutely true. Well, it's twofold. People don't seem to understand that the purpose of a constitution was to address this in many ways, right? Because people who knew better 200 or 300 years ago, they were well aware of something called the tyranny of the majority, which is, hey, if I get 50 plus one, I get to terrorize or abuse the 49%, right? And people thought, you know what? It's not because you have a majority that it makes whatever it is that you want to do moral. And so we need to have something in place called a constitution to limit what the government can do. So what he's saying here is absolutely true. Now, while we do have a constitution, the problem is, I think it needs to be rewritten from the get-go, and it has to be set up in such a way that it cannot be abused. Because right now, one of the problems that this country and the U.S. is facing are activist judges who are no longer rendering judgment based on what the Constitution says, but rather on what they think the Constitution ought to say, which is totally unacceptable. And I mean, it's these people have betrayed their trade in many ways, because that's not what you're supposed to do. If you don't like the Constitution, then you go back to the politicians and you tell them to rewrite one. But yeah, I mean, right now we have elements that are baked in the cake in terms of allowing, like he's talking about unqualified voters. I mean, there's so much. We right now we make no distinction at all between being someone who works and with children, or a business owner, or right, and somebody and someone who's well read. Compared to someone who has zero responsibility, someone who's never read any book, right? It's one vote. Now, I'm not, because I haven't really thought it through, I'm not really advocating at this point that we limit, but I'm simply recognizing that right now, whether you're well-informed or totally uninformed, your vote, carries the same weight, which seems rather weird. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. Actually, let me ask you this, since, because you obviously have a firm grasp on the whole political side thing. So bringing up the charter rights in our Constitution, to me, there's two areas of it that just basically, it's not only is it contradictory, but it's an oxymoron to suggest that you even have rights when you acknowledge that you also have this section 33 or section 1 where you can override those, right? To me, that if you have anything written in your Constitution or your Bill of Rights that suggests that you can override what it's supposed to be fundamental rights, well, then basically that's a sly way of inserting privileges as a substitute of actual rights. So what would it require? I would imagine the bar is pretty damn high, and it's probably very difficult, but maybe you can expand on that. Is what does it take? What would it take in Canada to actually get the Bill of Rights drafted in a manner that was much more reflective and so solid, right? So you'd probably have to get some people with some legal minds in there too, to make it so that, it's much less open to this weird subjective interpretation, like you say, from these activists, not just judges, but whether you're talking about from the legislature or the PMO's office, where they can just basically make things up as they go along.
Well, the first thing I would say is that I doubt that there's a perfect answer or solution to this, because I mentioned earlier about people's ability to rationalize just about any position. But even if you say, well, let's take section 1, right? I mean, Brian Peckford who's the last surviving member of the people who signed the Constitution.
Yes, from Newfoundland.
He said that the current understanding of the application of this is actually completely faulty, because he said, I was there, and what it was meant to cover were if the country got invaded, if we were at war, like really, really extreme things. And once again, people decided, because it didn't suit their purpose, to ignore what it was meant to be used for, to now expend it to, to things like the Freedom Convoy, where, like now it's been proven to be, the judgment has been that it was unconstitutional, what they did. But at the very least, I would say it would have to be rewritten in a way to make it much more explicit, like possibly even give examples, like this section can only be applied, and then maybe have, like the way that the U.S. Constitution is written regarding the responsibility of the federal government, which is, if it's not explicitly granted to the federal government, it resides with the states. Maybe something along those lines, but even that has been abused in the U.S. That's why I'm saying I'm not sure that there is necessarily a perfect solution to this. But I mean, Brian Mulroney said at one point that the Canadian Constitution was not worth the paper it was printed on, and to a large extent, what we have right now is absolutely true, because it's not constraining government, which is what it's supposed to do. So, I mean, if the government can do whatever they want, what's the purpose?
No, that's a great point. And actually, once again, but I don't want to take up all of it. I'm going to stick with some of the questions, but I even actually let me give one more follow up. So, in terms of the U.S., a very important thing that kind of, in some regard, I would think, kind of keeps is, as much as they like to get tyrannical, and that's always there. It's always omnibus and all around us. But I can't help but think that even the most corrupt politicians don't go too full on tyrannical in the U.S. by sheer fact. And they try to find runarounds or end ways to get around the Constitution. And they've tried desperately now for, a long time, and especially with the school shootings and the media propping up the narratives. But they've been, it's been an onslaught from these statists, and in particular Democrats, but even some of the neocons and others that, well, not so much neocons, but some of the establishment, even on the Republican side of things, who have somewhat supported, infringements on the gun rights. But because of the American founding fathers, thankfully, worded, the Second Amendment so simplistic in such a short amount of words that it almost made it impossible for even the most, intelligent, or the most sophist, the people that can manipulate language to make things seem, they can make black seem white if they want, right? But so far, after 200 and whatever years, they have yet to figure out a way to circumvent and to void, like, the Second Amendment. And that's something that I think should be rightfully something that we should have enshrined in our charter rights or a constitution in the U.S. I mean, we have somewhat of gun rights to a degree, but much, much, much more watered down and way more restrictive, especially under the Trudeau regime, than what the Americans have. So what is it that the Libertarian Party could do at the federal level, you and your folks in your party, in terms of, at least, is that something that's possible? Of course, you would need obviously support for that, but is it something that actually can take place, that could happen if you did have the support, where we could get something where we could genuinely enshrine something that resembles the Second Amendment in the U.S. here in Canada?
Now, while I agree with you as to the importance of what you just mentioned, my biggest pet peeve, in a way, with the Constitution, other than, again, right now, I don't think it's worth very much, is that private property rights are not covered at all.
Right.
And that to me is a terrible, terrible problem. Now, the way I would want to approach this, and now maybe people could, accuse me of bribery, but as you know, in order to have a constitution amendments in this country, you need to have the support of at least 7 provinces, and those 7 provinces together have to add up to more than 50% of the population. Okay. Now, it seems to me that if I were to go to every premier in this country and said, I'm willing to transfer billions and billions of dollars in transfer money, like in tax points, right? In return for your signature on a constitution that would make gun rights more clear, private property rights protected, a rewrite to limit what the government can do to people when they don't like what they do, and things like that. I think it might have, because I'll tell you, premiers are as power hungry as any other group, and to say to them, look, you would have much more power to run your province the way you see fit, I think would be very appealing to them.
Yeah, and actually that's a great point, because that would also help to decentralize power in this country, which once again is not the perfect answer, but it's something that's a much greater benefit by the sheer fact, just like in the US, right? So the 48 mainland states, well, even if you take Alaska and Hawaii, but you got basically 50 different experiments down there where you, at least once again, and we're seeing that taking place in real time, in real life here, where people that are sick and tired of, like your Dave Rubins and others like that, right, living on the left coast over in California, where they voted with their dollars and decide, because there are different jurisdictions, different states that, uphold and have more respect for certain constitutional rights and freedoms, that they have the ability. So yes, in Canada, I think your idea would work good. Is yes, of course you would be appealing to their own rational self-interest, which of course that's just reality, right? So you would be handing off some of that power to the provinces, but then it would give Canadians at least the capacity and the ability. It's not the perfect solution, but at least it would give people some competitive, right? Once again, where these provinces could have their own means of figuring out what works best, and Canadians could once again choose to maybe change a location, move to a different jurisdiction or province that maybe did have more respect for their inherent and fundamental freedoms.
Once upon a time in Europe, before countries came to be, they had city states.
Yeah.
Right. So you had a city state of Milan or Florence, and it's a little known fact that the powers that controlled these city states, they had to be aware that they couldn't push their citizens too far, because they would pick up and go. And that's what I would like to see in this country, is where provinces are competing, because boy, if you start mistreating your people because your taxes are too high or the service you provide are terrible or whatever, people could pick up and go. And by the way, I don't know if you're aware, but the intra-migration in this country right now is that you got a massive amount of Ontarians leaving for Alberta. So Alberta is not perfect, but a lot of people are thinking, this is way better than what we have in Ontario. Yeah. So yes, I would love to see much more power to the provinces and much more competition between them to keep them in check. It's just like a free market.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And once again, this is something, so you folks that are watching the stream, these are things that actually have the potential to be brought into the real world and to brought to fruition. But once again, this can only happen if the Libertarian Party can have some kind of sizable influence or sway out there in that political landscape. And that, of course, can only happen with, at least a sizable portion. We don't have to be the majority by any stretch, but we can have a definitely outsized influence just by sheer fact of how great the ideas are, and because we do live in an era and a time frame where we can be suppressed, but we can't be silenced entirely. So we can get our ideas and information out there, but we definitely need the support, or in particular at the political level. People like Jacques definitely need that economic support to get this stuff. And once again, this isn't pipe dreams, folks. This isn't just two guys talking, in utopian, some futuristic thing. This is something that can actually happen in real time in Canada if we can get a sizable enough influence of people who can, put some pressure and sway on, even if some other of the established party forms government. Well, if they have to, or if they require, the support of libertarians and people like us, because we are not just growing in stature, but in numbers in Canada. I'll tell you, just 10, 12 years ago, when I started really getting into this stuff, I mean, you could count on a couple hands how many of us libertarians were even known in this country, right? Whereas now I'm just hearing the word tossed around constantly. I mean, even some of these hacks in the establishment media are not doing it in a positive way, but they're using the term, which was never used in the past. So they're even the establishment is recognizing. And I think that's what's actually putting the biggest fear in the establishment, is the fact that they know that libertarians have the best ideas, both socially and economically. And that's more than likely the reason why they do constantly, at least suppress and ignore, right? They will treat the far right or people like on the other side of the political, they'll give them all kinds of spotlight. They'll shine the spotlight right on them as a means to influence voters to vote for them. But they'll ignore libertarians, because if the spotlight is ever put on the libertarians, even though they'd like to do it in a negative manner, well, once you put the libertarian in the spotlight, like I said, and the people can hear the ideas, well, then the facade's up. I mean, Ron Paul proved that when he ran down in the U.S. I mean, the establishment media tried everything to undermine his campaign, but as much as he didn't win, the votes in the political, but his influence and how he grew the support for the Libertarian Party and how that functioned even a decade after was a massive boost for libertarians. So yeah, if we can replicate that in some way up here in Canada, it would be awesome. Anyways, I know we're at the 2-hour mark there, Jacques, and I'm sorry for keeping you this long. But I really appreciate it. Like, I'm really enjoying this conversation. And I got to say, I'm definitely looking forward to hopefully have a conversation with you. But I'll just maybe get to a couple more questions, and then I'll let you get back to your great Saturday and your weekend. And once again, we'll get a chance to talk again for sure. But Dave, I'll just mention this. Oh, no, wait, no, here. No, that was towards Dave, I guess. Let's see. Okay, we know. Okay, let me see. So here's Nuraj again. We know economic socialism is a terrible idea. Empirically, voting socialism ignores the fact not everyone is equally qualified. I think Socrates said that voting is a skill. So I'm not sure what that is quite meaning with that there. But if I don't know if you want to try that, or do you want me to move on to another one there? Or
Well, I would simply say that I think I agree with the statement, although I'm not quite sure what Socrates meant by voting as a skill. But, yeah, economic socialism is, again, I mean, and he's using the word empirically because, it's accurate. You just have to look at the outcome of the old Soviet Union, any of the Eastern Bloc countries. I mean, economically, they were basket cases,
Yes. Oh, actually, no. Now I see a couple comments down. So yes, actually, no. I do remember you, Niraj. Actually, I do remember that interview. Yes, I had an interview with Niraj. I believe, yeah, he's a big proponent of Bitcoin. Because I do remember that. That's quite a few years ago. Obviously, it was back in 2019, and I do actually remember having that conversation. I think it was a very engaging conversation. And maybe I'll just ask you, actually, as the leader of the Libertarian Party in Canada, what are your thoughts on Bitcoin? That's actually something like some kind of decentralized or cryptocurrency or something based on the blockchain. What are your thoughts on that stuff there, Jacques?
Well, I am more of a hard money person myself.
Right.
I gravitate more towards gold and silver. The concern I have with Bitcoin, and I'm not trolling here. This is a genuine concern that I have.
Yep.
Is if it were only Bitcoin, I think I would be much more likely to embrace it. But there are currently 10,000 other cryptocurrencies out there. 10,000, right? Like when people say to me, "Well, Bitcoin is finite," which I like. Then I turn around and say, but it appears that the number of competing cryptocurrency is infinite, right? Like it moved from 100 to like 10,000, at which point that's the element that maybe I'm not completely grasping, but it seems to me that suddenly you're looking at the ability to produce an infinite number, just like fiat currency, amount of cryptocurrency. It may not be Bitcoin, but so this is where I probably need to educate myself more.
Okay.
But that's my concern right now. The fact that gold and silver have been used as currency for 5,000 years to me is I'm a bit of a Darwinian from the, like something that has lasted that long seems to me to have proven itself to be quite good. So
Right.
that's in a nutshell how I feel about
Well,
Bitcoin.
that's actually a pretty good point to make, because once again, even myself, as much as I've been a couple areas and people I've listened to talk about Bitcoin. The premise, the underlying structure of it seems like a good way to decentralize and take away the power of currency from people. But once again, we've seen multiple times already, depending on how it's set up and in some of these exchanges, how they've really soiled people to the and turned and made caused bitter taste in people's mouth because of these things that have happened. So I'm not completely against Bitcoin, but once again, I'm a little concerned about this stuff as well, which is why I've never, I've got a little bit of that stuff. People have donated it to me and stuff, but I've never made it something as part of my portfolio or something that I've overly active in. And once again, a lot of that is just like you, Jacques. If I am not fully versed in something that I understand it enough, I would feel really uncomfortable to try to tell people or suggest to people that that's an answer. Whereas yet gold and silver, once again, tangible commodities that have a finite supply, can't be easily reproduced, or are convertible, have a history. So it's not like you have to reinvent the wheel or anything. I definitely think that those are good substitutes. But once again, as a libertarian and someone who's all about freedom and competition in the marketplace, listen, whatever people can come up with, right? And if you can make it work, as long as it's voluntarily and voluntary, and people can engage and interact in that stuff on their own. Once again, to me, I'm not against it, but yeah, I definitely wouldn't. I'm still a little bit on the sidelines, but that's something. Anyways, that's a big long story that people have been talking about. Millions of hours probably at this point in time, right? So far be it that we're going to figure this stuff out today. But anyways, I think I've used up enough of your time, Jacques. And once again, I'm very much appreciative of the fact that you come on the show today. And I definitely hope that we'll get a chance and we'll talk about some more stuff going forward. And once again, anytime you want to talk to me in terms of anything as it pertains to supporting the Libertarian Party, and I'll be definitely doing that too. After I get off the live stream, I'll be making a donation to you fine folks, and I'll be definitely, like I say, helping not just you, but anyone else. If you got other people in the party that you would like them to reach out to me and speak with, once again, you can either do it on social media here on X, or you can go to Canadian Libertarian BH. You can find my stuff on my YouTube channel or anywhere you go to find like where my emails are. And I'm always willing to help out. And like I say, I'm being much more pragmatic these days. And I'm very thankful to know that we have great figures and people with, a lot of intelligence and a lot of knowledge on these subjects that actually have the ability and the willingness to give Canadians at least a chance to try to get out from under the big giant thumb of the state that's just bearing down hardcore on us these days. And I'm white pilled, and you've helped me stay in that mindset there, Jacques. So once again, really appreciate that. And if there's anything you want to say before we tie this up, go right to it, man.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation. I really enjoy this. You spoke beautifully in support of our movement, which I, again, very much appreciate. And I will certainly reach out to you in the future, because I think that there are things that we can build from at this point.
Excellent. All right. Well, you have yourself, like I say, a great rest of the day, and same with all you fine folks in the chat. And have another great weekend. It seems like it's going to be decent, depending on what part of the Canada you're in. And we'll see you in the next live stream. It's the Canadian Libertarian.
And a happy Father's Day to all the father out there.
Yes, actually, yes, you're right. Tomorrow's Father's Day, and yes, good point. I won't be doing a live stream tomorrow, so thank you for actually breaking that up, Jacques. Because yeah, I won't be live streaming tomorrow. I'll be definitely busy with the family. I'm actually going over to my oldest son. I went yesterday with my youngest son to a concert with him that he was actually playing in, and then I'm going to my oldest son. He just moved into another place not long ago. We're going to have a little bit of one of those above ground pool parties, so it probably won't be a whole lot of swimming, more or less just relaxing, maybe having a little enjoyable time with each other. But yes, enjoy your Father's Day, everyone. And like I say, we'll see everyone in the next live stream. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.
Bye.